Welcome everybody to today's webinar on organic potting mixes featuring Howard Prussack, High Meadows Farm in Westminster West, Vermont. And this is sponsored by University of Vermont Extension and the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Association. Howard's got 40 years of farming experience and has a lot to share about starting seedlings and how to select the right mix. So take it away, Howard.
Goodness. Hey, good morning, everybody. Everybody got your coffee? I'm already jacked up here. Just try to stay calm. Yeah, actually, next month is my 50th anniversary, Vern, of moving to Vermont and working on Samuel's Cayman's Nature Farms right down the road. It just struck me. It's like, where did the 50 years? It's like, boom. Uh, so yeah, you learn some things, you make a lot of mistakes, and that's how you really learn things. And I've made my share of mistakes, but we're plodding along. I was just telling Vern, this greenhouse that we're in was my first real greenhouse, steel house, and we put this up in 1979. It's not the one in the picture; it's the one I'm actually standing in. And we've been using that continuously. When I built it, actually, we were heating it with coal and wood. Uh, and we got out of the coal business after the first year. Enough of that. Now it's just propane. So the house in the slide that we're looking at, that's a cold house for us. So we do have a heater in there, but that's where we put all the veggie starts. And I like to run that in the mid 40s just to harden them off. And they really seem to like uh, the cooler weather. Now, just so you know, but my business, we're more than 90% wholesale, and we ship and deliver to 4 states vegetable and herb starts. That's our primary business. We used to do hanging baskets. We used to do perennials. We used to do flowers. And over the years, we've just been narrowing and narrowing our focus, which is hard. It's hard to get rid of items. But as we've simplified and focused, strangely enough, our sales keep on increasing. And I'm a firm believer in category management. And we know our category and we try to manage it, and we're really good on scheduling the plants so that every week we always have product for our stores. And being in 4 states and garden centers and co-ops and whatnot, it's a lot. Um, Primarily, we're using a pre-made potting soil, peat based, and we do add some compost as a sort of I call it as an inoculant for biological activity when in our vegetables, hardly ever in our herbs. So we're using this Lambert organic, and I've used a lot of different organic peat-based mixes. Some I didn't like. I've had problems and this and that. And also you go with what's easy to get. And our distributor, which is Griffin, um, stopped distributing Fofford. Fofford now only sells direct. And we were using the Fofford, but we had a sample of this Lambert mix sent a couple of years ago. We liked it. I liked the texture. I'm a big believer in the soil needs to has a soft feel to it. And we like this. And we amend it a little bit with sustain, and that's about it. And water. We add about 20% volume-wise of water into our mixer, and I'll show you a slide of the mixer. And the best way to do it is I try to mix up at least the first batch the night before, and it gives it the overnight for the peat fibers to absorb the water, and they fluff out, and you actually increase the volume of your mix that way, and it's nicer to work with. This is an SB machine with a conveyor belt on it, and we could just feed the trays either 1004s or 4-inch pots, and we do both. And yesterday we ran 100 trays of 1004s in like 10 minutes through the machine, and then we have to stop and refill it. So if you have enough people throwing in soil and stuff, you could knock out hundreds and hundreds per hour. the warning I got to tell people when you get a machine is different by hand mixing, and you learn this the hard way. Of you don't want to run your machine down to the very last, quart of material. The peat fibers will wear down. There are paddles in these machines, and the more you're agitating your mix, you're breaking down your peat fibers, and so you're reducing uh, the the amount of porosity of air that could go into your mix. And you don't want to do that. The reason that you're using a peat mix is for air, for drainage, water drainage, and you want air. And I know like sometimes we just press, like even yesterday of trying to get the trays out, we're pressed for time and I'll forget that, oh no, I should stop before it's empty and add and do another load of mix. And you'll find some trays come out at the end of the run and they're fines, call them fines because they ground down. And those are going to be the trays that turn up and there'll be trouble later on the herbs. If the plant's sitting around because it's a slow growing herb, then you're going to find some algae and you'll start fungus gnats they love that. So being aware of not running your mix, not beating, you don't want to beat the peat up for very long if you can help it. Small batches work much better. Of course, when I used to do it all by hand, that wasn't a problem. You can't beat the things up by hand. And until we got the SB machine, I used to do it all by hand. It's great for building up your muscles, but we use germination mix, which is a very fine mix for all of our seed grown herbs and veggie starts. This is a roller that I got from Growmore down in Pittsfield, Mass. And they'll custom make these rollers for whatever size tray you have. It wasn't cheap, but it'll last forever. And they're just perfectly once, twice, and you've got a perfectly inverted pyramid in the tray, all uniform depth and compaction. And when you drop your seeds, they just roll right into the middle until you get a really nice stand of uniform plants. And that's really important. Uniformity of depth and how you cover the seed with the vermiculite. That's what gives you the uniform emergent. And very important when you're doing production weekly and you're trying to keep to a schedule so you're not, oh, some are up and some aren't. You really, it's almost like we're running a factory here sometimes. And but the dibble is great. Growmore, Pittsfield, Mass. I think they'll still make them. Although somebody online showed me that he was doing, what's this, 3D printing. Somehow he innovated and he figured out a way and he's running them off on a 3D printer. So anybody can have a go at that. But this is what we use and I love it. Everybody here, what's nice, it doesn't take much training. Anybody I bring in to prepare seed trays, it's like, okay, I know I think I can handle it. So it's an easy tool for anyone to learn. But the germination mix, the fine mix is what I really like. And I think some of these slides you'll see the uniformity of what's coming up. Now these benches in this house, they're heated benches, hot water running through a propane water heater. And I could turn on each bench individually or run them all at the same time. And there's a thermostat and I can set the thermostat. And over the years, I've been starting to run them hotter and hotter than I used to. And most seeds enjoy it, especially basil. And I do use some of these benches to grow the basil on even after we transplant it. I might have a picture of that. Basil's one of those plants that they love hot feet. They don't even want to be in Vermont. They hate Vermont. So you got to fool them, especially in March and April and most of May. And I tell my customers, don't even plant basil outside till June, but it doesn't matter. We're shipping them now. Garden centers bring them in, and I guess people are happy. They keep on buying them. So heated.
Howard, what temperature do you run
All
the
right.
water at or
And
the
the
trays?
way I know the temperature, besides the thermostat, I have an infrared thermometer. So I'll check the actual soil in the. So I try to run about 65 degrees on top of the soil. And underneath, it's probably closer to 70, 75 degrees. That's the nighttime temperature. And that's the temperature that I use for germination.
And then are you using vermiculite on some
Yes.
crops?
Yeah, some things in this particular picture, some of the seeds don't get covered. They need light to germinate, like thyme. We don't cover thyme seed with vermiculite, but I would say more than half of the seeds we do, or 3/4, are all vermiculite covered. I use a coarse grade. I don't use the fine grade. I get that question all the time. And I try to get the coarse grade, or medium grade, it's called. We get big bags of it. They're hard to get all of a sudden. The price of vermiculite, which used to be cheap, is like quadrupled in price. And somebody told me that the only vermiculite mine in the United States is closed. And I don't know if it was COVID or what, but we use vermiculite a lot. Luckily, I've got enough stockpiled for the year. It keeps the seeds from drying out. It prevents mold growing on top. It's just good material. So we like it a lot. This was my old germination. I don't know where you dug that slide. That's way back in the Wayback Machine. We sold it. Somebody's happily using it, but that's what I used to use. And it was nice before I had these heated benches. It's covered it with plastic and it kept a nice temperature, but at some point it's not practical if you're doing the volume that but for growers just growing their own plants, these type of things work great. I've seen people take old refrigerators or freezers and turn them into germination chambers, and they all work. Anything that'll give you a warmer temperature and keep the moisture in, they'll all work. But I like my heated benches because we could water them easily. And you can see here that half a tray that isn't germinated was not planted. We do sometimes just half a trays because that's what our records show that the demand will be for that week. Will be 1.5 trays worth units of, looks like, thyme. And I hate doing half trays, but Lisa insists that this is the way it works. So I don't argue. She does all the seed planning week by week, and it's a lot of work. But you can see the uniformity. We actually count seeds into each cell, and we've gotten very fast at it. Again, for uniformity, I used to just pinch my seed, and you wind up with 8 seeds or 100 seeds, because when the seeds are small, it's really hard to be precise. But using a couple of tools, we've got it down where we could really be precise. Basil, 3 seeds, 3 seeds. Tomatoes, 1 seed, 1 seed. Mostly we use 288s. For anything that's going in a 4-inch pot, like these are 128 cell plug size. So that's why you'll see, and I don't have a dibble roller for these. We just use an inverted tray and do a press, or just sometimes just fingers and make a little dibble. It's important to get that dibble in on some things. These are tomatoes in 288s. I ran it. Normally we would have done them in 200 trays, but our delivery got back ordered on a 200 tray, the 200, so we used the 288s, and they work just as fine. Singular seeds, one at a time, on the heated propagation tables, and they pop up. And yeah, we do a lot of tomatoes. We pop them out. We have a popper, a tray popper for the 288s, and it just makes it really quickly. I think yesterday they transplanted, I don't know, she did thousands of these. I don't know if you can see in the picture. And those were all from these 288s right behind me.
And Howard, you mentioned you're adding sustain, which is that, I think it's a turkey-based manure fertilizer.
It's pelletized. It's 844. And when we get to the soil test that I sent you, you'll see, and I'll tell you how I amended from that first batch. I was going by what they recommended for plants, and I took, like, between their low and medium rate, which was like 8 pounds per yard, which really turned out way too high for my needs. And we're not even using it now on some of our herbs. We definitely don't use it in any of the seed starting the germination mix. You don't need any fertilizer. Seeds don't need it. And we're transplanting so quick. But we're going now between 2 and 4 pounds. We're adding per yard of the Lamberts. And when we're adding compost, I'm not even putting in sustain. Sustain and compost are not a great mix from what I've found in my experience. And if you're adding compost, um, you really don't need the sustain or not much. And we also start liquid fertilizing with nature source. So
And about how much compost do you add to a yard of
good,
Lamberts?
good question. I'm adding 3 5-gallon buckets. So it doesn't seem like a lot, but it in fact seems to be enough. And I'm only doing that for the vegetables. So tomatoes and broccoli and any vegetable start, even arugula. They like compost. They like the moisture holding capabilities of compost. There is advantages and disadvantages to using compost mix. So you got to weigh it out. You know, what are you growing? What are your temperatures? What's the crop? You know, and every grower has to figure it out for themselves what their mix of products are. So for me, I'm just being selective in how we use it. Um, so no for herbs, yes for veggies. What do we got here? Okay, these are Swiss chard, direct seeded. So a lot of the veggies outside of the tomatoes, we're direct seeding into the soil mix. And this is our regular soil mix that we're running through the machine. And we have a dibble that gives us a guide for the tray, for the seeders to follow. And again, we're doing seed counts. So each cell has a fairly uniform. And we backed off. I used to plant a lot of seeds. But you know, when these things sitting around and retail is displays and they're too crowded, they'll start suffering from deficiencies and watering issues. So we found less seeds per cell, but bigger plants, and customers seem much happier that way. They're getting a better root system. They're not ripping apart. The seedlings are much, and we do them in 4-packs, by the way. We used to do 6-packs. These are 1004s, so it's 10 packs of 4-count, 4-cell count. And that gives us a nice dollar volume, 10 packs. We charge by the pack. And it's a bigger cell, the 4-count cell, it's a bigger cell than a 6-pack. And I think it gives the customer a better plant. So you're getting better results. You're getting a bigger root ball. So for me, I'm trying to please the end user, which is the gardener who's buying these.
Hey, Howard, 2 questions in the chat. What is
Yeah.
your source for sustain?
We're getting it from Griffin Greenhouse Supply.
And then a question, what is the germination mix you prefer? Is it the
I'm
same?
using, because we're certified organic, I have to use certified organic germination mix. I'm using Lambert's germination mix. It was coming in like 20-quart bags, easy to carry. And all of a sudden I got a delivery yesterday, and now they're bales. I don't know if I ordered the wrong number, but they're 55-pound bales of germination mix. But it's very fine. I'll wander over there and I can show you in a moment. Basil, not as uniform as I would like, but you know, they'll catch up. But there's the nice type of root system that we like to see. And these were growing on heat. And you can see that the roots are going right to the bottom. They're quite happy. They really don't know they're in Vermont. And then when we transplant these into either packs or the 4-inch, they do take right off. They don't skip a beat because they have a nice, happy root system. And plus, we're using the same soil mix. They're not getting shocked by putting it into something different. I know I've tried transplanting into our compost-based mix, and they just did not like it. And that's why I don't use any compost in my basil production. Other people may, but we don't. We also don't get any powdery or downy mildew on our basil. And some growers have a problem with it. And knock wood, it's never been a problem in our spring or summer production. One year, years ago, I had downy mildew on the basil in a fall crop that I was fooling around with, and I don't do it anymore. I don't grow fall basil any longer. But for our spring and summer production, no problem. Okay, now here, I actually did do, as a nod to my friend Carl, this is Vermont compost. You see, I tagged it. A lot of when I do my testing, sometimes I can't keep track of them, and I'll do a test tray and I'll mark it, but somehow it got picked and it sold. I managed to hang on to these, and these did really well. These were growing on heat, okay? And that really makes a big difference. So as I said earlier, it depends on how you're going to be growing these things on. So in this case, it did really well. And I do have a soil test. I tested the Vermont compost. The test came back and they were great. And we'll talk about that. So I'm going to be fooling around more with it. Trouble is I've got too many years of experience. I go back but maybe problems I had 10 years ago, maybe they're not a problem now. So, we'll see what we could do. Again, the roots for me, the mixes that we used, we're trying to grow really good roots. We're sending out plants that are vigorous and healthy, and you can't get better than that. Plus, it's mint. I think you could grow mint in the desert and it'll probably do well. But there it is. So okay, here's our first result. Who's potting soil?
Howard, do you want to just talk a little bit about how you take the tests and?
Sure. I love getting these tests back. And I'll do it. I try to do it early enough in the season so I know what I'm dealing with. But on the potting mix, sometimes I wasn't ready. I take about a pint of mix in a baggie, and I'll mark it. And I send it up to Maine. I think that's where UVM sends them anyway. Vern, is that where the tests are going anyway? So I send them direct to up to University of Maine, and I get the results back within 2 weeks. So it's pretty nice. It's about $25 per test, which is super reasonable to know what you're doing. It gives you a nice window, and I thought this mix was going to look this way, but actually it's that way. Or if I'm having problems, sometimes I'll if there's some trays that things are not doing well, and I'll take a sample. I'll empty a couple of pots into the bag, and I'll send that sample up just to see, well, what's going on here. And I used to do my own tests, and I do have a EC meter, and I could do that, but I'm getting a clearer picture. It's a much more precise way to know what's going on, even if I have to wait 2 weeks.
The top's cut off here, but this is the greenhouse media or saturated media test, not the regular soil test.
Right, it's a saturated media test, and I always indicate that on the test, so they do the right test. And I do field soil tests, obviously, as well, but of course, the majority of our business is in the greenhouse. This is what we use. This is my soil. So this is the Lamberts that I added the recommended amount of sustain, and some things did great, and then some things did not do well, and that's why I amended my formula. And you can see the ammonia levels here were really way higher than they should be. Most of the results, and the pH was strangely high. I have no idea. And I sent a sample of my Lamberts without anything added to it, but I haven't gotten the results back yet. Probably come this afternoon or tomorrow. So I don't know why the pH was so high. but it hasn't affected anything. I mean, the growth was, everything was doing great. So it's interesting how, you know, you get the test back and they may not look what recommended, but then the plants, oh, they don't care.
So
Sometimes.
one thing to point out is because it's a, organic source of N, the proteins are getting broken down, going to ammonium and then converting to nitrate. So if the soil is warm and moist, that ammonium will go down and the nitrate will go up. So by the time you're planting and growing in this, the levels may be more optimal than when you tested.
It's true. One of the problems, all the soil mix companies recommend preparing and wetting your soil ahead of time. Well, I don't know any grower who has enough room to prepare a day's, it's hard to prepare it. So, I add the sustain, you add your water, you do your mix and you go, sometimes within hours. So that's the results of what they are. The top, which test was this, Vern? Is this the same?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, just lowered. Okay, yeah, yeah. This is the McEnroe compost-based mix that I ran the test on. Now this was leftover from last year. It was sitting out in one of the tunnels. Probably got wet from condensation and whatnot. So it was interesting to see what showed up here. The nitrate level seemed excessive. I mean, I would never plant directly into this myself. That's why we just add. The thing about compost, from year to year and from batch to batch, the analysis is always seems to change. So
And one thing to note here, there are a lot of salts, but a lot of that's due to the high level of nutrients too. So this would be something good to amend a peat base mix with.
well, that's why the Lambert's peat, it's which is pretty low analysis. It's a nice dilution. Um, the only thing we had trouble with, I don't know if I have any slides that made it to you, was we had one batch of thyme. Thyme is very sensitive, and I never use compost in thyme, but it is sensitive to too much nitrogen. It really doesn't like NPH or salts. And so we had one batch of thyme that is not happy, but everything else seems to be thriving. Okay. Any other questions on this?
So one thing to notice on these tests at the very bottom, how high the phosphorus is. And these are water extracts, so if that much phosphorus is coming out, that's a lot of water. Of course, we don't have the same concerns as out in the field because it's not an environmental threat, but it still points out you don't need to add additional phosphorus when fertilizing in a mix like this.
Yeah, this is Vermont compost, and it looks to me it's a great analysis. I mean, it's very balanced. The pH is spot on. Soluble salts are not excessive. Right, Vern? This looks like a nice.
Yeah, and like with any compost, that ammonium just needs some time to
Inoculate.
be converted.
Yeah. Calcium's right. Yeah. A good mix, good test. Follow the hose. Who's ever at the end of the hose is usually me.
So that's the final slide, and we can open it up to any questions or comments, observations from others.
I see. Now I see the questions. Okay. Sauce for sustain, I answered that. Germination mix. McEnroe, we get it in slings now, and we go in on a trailer load with Harlow Farm. I used to get it in bags, which I prefer because of handling, um, less labor and a uniform amount. You know how many quarts are in a bag, but now we just measure it out from the slings. Um, and it's all palletized, so it's easy to handle. How much of the Lambert mix to 8 pounds of sustain? Again, I cut down on the 8 pounds of sustain, but when I do a full mix, it's a yard. My machine will hold a yard worth of mix, of whatever mix. Um, and
Managing your greenhouse water, do you test it?
I
Do you
uh,
temper the heat?
I don't I don't temper it at all. I don't have an ability really too much. Although I just with the new water tanks, we just received last night. Now I'll have 1,500 gallons to start my day with at room greenhouse temperature. So I will start having tempered water. Um, I check water when I do our gap uh, water test, and it's the alkalinity and everything was really fine. It was like 6.5 for our water on the pH. Our EC was really low. I know there was no nitrates. There was 0 nitrates in our water. I felt gypped that our well water was so clean. I do add root shield when we're doing, not on the vegetables, but when I'm doing the herbs. We have salt shakers that I fill with root shield, and we just do a quick sprinkle into each pot, and it's just enough um, granules, and it really works well. Um,
Some
just
mixes you can buy pre-inoculated. Is that an option with the Lamberts, do you know?
Oh, well, sure. I haven't pursued that. They will add anything you want for uh, additional cost. But I always felt it hasn't been shown that adding an inoculant too far ahead of when, I receive our delivery in the fall. We don't use it till, March. Um, I don't know if all these inoculants are still active in your mix. Matter of fact, they recommend using the mix within 2 months of receiving it. Even ProMix says that in their, when you read their brochures, and it's like, okay, well, you're getting it in October, you know, you're not potting up your vegetable plants in December. So I don't know how viable that is. So we haven't gone that way. Depends on what you're adding. If you're adding iron or something else, but something not stable like a biological, I'm not sure, if that makes sense to me. Someone have to look into that more. What seeds do I grow in the McEnroe rather than Lambert? Well, we only use McEnroe as an add-on with the Lambert. I don't plant anything straight McEnroe, although I used to do straight. Tomatoes certainly fine, or any of the compost-based. Tomatoes seem to do really well in a straight compost-based
So I think
soil.
you said you were adding, do you say 3 5-gallon
3
buckets
5-gallon buckets, yeah, into a yard of McEnroe.
of Lamberts?
Lamberts, adding McEnroe to the Lamberts. But you could do more. It's just, I have to have a formula, a uniform formula, because if I'm not making the soil and somebody has to fill in, there has to be a written formula that people follow, because I'm not around, although I try to always be around. I never leave. But so that was the formula that we came up with, which is good for most everything. But certainly tomatoes could, if I did a 50-50 mix, tomatoes would be fine. Lamberts and macaroons. Tomatoes seem to tolerate a little more salt than almost anything else, or nutrients. They'll just suck it up.
What do you do with the mixes after the season, or is everything shipped out? Do you have any leftover mix that you compost, or what do you do with it?
No, I do have, sometimes there'll be bales Or actually, last year I wound up selling everything we had left over to Paul Harlow Farm. They needed it, so it worked out well for me. Uh, I seem to be able to. There's always people seem to need potting soil. Some years I've wound up having a pallet or two kicking around, but the last 2 years, no. Uh, they're hard to get. I've read in some parts of the country, it's impossible to get potting mix now. So word to the wise, I mean, pre-ordering, you know, late summer and getting it in, making sure you have it. We don't know what'll happen going forward, but this year stuff is really uh, short. I know I was told Premier wasn't shipping potting mix. They couldn't get vermiculite. The whole industry has been, the demand for supplies has been kind of nuts. And because of COVID and factories not being running at full capacity, plastic trays, just supplies in general. Waiting to the last minute is not a good philosophy. If you could pre-order it, what you need. And we're probably going to move to a pre-order system for our plant without stores. We're finding stores have been ordering and they're hoarding plants, and we have to stop that. We have to cut down what the amount they're ordering, and because we're not going to have enough. We're just selling out production, and we don't have enough. I hate saying no to anybody, so we have to start limiting it. But I'm hearing this from all over the country. Demand for plants is just through the roof. I don't know if it's new gardeners or nobody knows if it's the stores hoarding because of last year, but we don't know. But I suspect it's probably a little of everything. So it's real pressure. We just can't turn the dial and increase production. It just doesn't work that way. We don't have the manpower to do that at the time.
So we have a number of
Hmm.
growers on the call. I'd be curious to hear what mixes people are using that they're satisfied with or having challenges. Wiz, you've been growing for years. Of course, you're right up there next to Carl. What are you growing in?
Now I could see people. I can't hear him though.
Well, maybe I.
Is he
Oh, there you
muted?
go. So we use Carl's Fort V for everything, and it works great. We don't use anything else. We cover some things with vermiculite that are long germinating, but generally we'll just use Carl's mix on top of that as well and just water it in. And we don't ever mend, we never water in fertilizer. We pot up if we need to, but we're very happy. I don't work on commission, but it does work.
And it works for herbs as well for you?
Everything. I'm kind of simple-minded, so I like, just one thing fits everything and it works great.
And hey, Ryan, you're on. What are you using for mixes?
Ooh, is that me, Vern, you're talking to?
Yeah.
I've been in and out, running around crazy. Same thing as Richard. I use Fort V for everything. And I have had some issues with some crusting on the top and some algae, but that also could be my watering habits too. But generally things are pretty good with the Fort V.
Great. Bruce Worcester, how about you? What's going on over on the New Hampshire side with potting soil?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. We
Hey.
typically do our starts in the McEnroe Premier or Premium Light compost mix, and that works overall pretty well for us. We do top with vermiculite, the coarse grade. We do tend to see some difficulties with herbs like basil. The basil just often struggles, and so I've been interested to hear what Howie's doing for that. But we may try a little bit more heat, or maybe getting a little bit of a different mix to try for the basil. But that's where we're at.
Well, that used to be my experience with basil when I only used Fort V, which again, it's a great mix, but basil didn't seem to like it. But putting it on heat makes all the difference. I mean, Carl will tell you if you can't provide at least 60-degree temperature for your basil, you shouldn't grow basil. That's what they need, or more. And having them on the heated bench, oh man, they love it. So that I would try it on the heated bench and use the same mix and see what happens. Otherwise, it is easy to grow it in a peat mix without the heat. It's just the way it is. Nobody's ever explained why, but that's, that's what happens. Try heat first and then fool around with something else if that doesn't work. The heat should work if you have a way to build heated benches or have heated benches or run a house hotter. But they really like the bottom heat. There's no question. And it's efficient, much more efficient to run the room temperature at 65 to 70 degrees and the air at 58 degrees. And they like it that way.
Caleb's noting that people are having some problems with compost-based mixes over in Maine and asking if there are lessons learned and what the issue is. One thing I can share, we've had this over the years, even with commercial providers that usually make a great mix because it is a biological product and there's so much variation. Every once in a while plants struggle, and I think sometimes there's a high level of organic acids that inhibit plant growth and they seem to get broken down over time. Perhaps some part of the compost hadn't completely finished composting. That's some information I've read. It's not been substantiated, but anybody else have something to add on their experience with compost-based mix problems and how they've dealt with it?
Well, one thing, we used to get botrytis a lot. Again, it's because the soil, compost-based soil don't dry out as much. They're holding on. And again, it's a lot of it has to do with the heat and the year. Like this year, for whatever reason, we hardly have any loss from botrytis at all. It could be the root shield, when but whatever all the different things that we put together, it made a difference. But overall, I say, and some years are just better than others, for any particular reason. But when we used to do much more compost-based stuff, botrytis was a much bigger problem. I think it's the moisture, the water holding capability. Maybe it's the acid. Like I say, it is a biological product. But because of it's a biological product, that's why I like adding it to a lot of things, but in small amounts. I use it as an inoculation rather than as a base mix, and that works for me.
How about Golden Russet Farm? Growing seedlings a long time. What's your experience?
Hi, everyone. It's Pauline here. We use Carl's Fertilizer, and we've been happy with it. We also do use the medium Vermiculite to top most everything. Yeah.
And any additional inoculants that do you add fertilizers or any other inoculants?
Not when planting, but we do fertilize later with Nature Source. Yeah.
Becky Madden, what do you do for your seedlings or used to do it at the Intervale? Probably used a bunch of different mixes over the years.
Yeah, I've always mostly leaned on Fort V, have tried some Fort Light, and then also experimented with making my own potting soil, but it kind of returned to the Fort V. I think it holds up. And especially I think if you're moving into like 4-inch pots, like if you have a bunch of different things going, I think it sustains the plants without any like stress about fertilizing or anything like that. So I feel like every time I back away from it, it seems like return.
So that's a good question to put out there. And Howard, you said you used to do baskets. So when you are growing on for longer periods, transplanting, how do you deal with the additional fertility needs? Is it more compost, a different mix, or do you?
Well, that's where I'm using the Nature Source. No, you can't pre-front too much fertility. There's only so much you could pre-front in the mix or you'll have problems. But that's why I got out of hanging baskets, and many reasons I got out of some of those longer term crops. Insects being one, and whitefly and aphids, and that's why I've simplified our mix. Now the only flowers we grow are really just for the beneficial. We grow pots of alyssum that we put all over the place. But lick fertigation, that's really the key. for longer term. Flowers, you know, you want to get it. They need food. Although the sustained results that I think it was UConn did their test a year or two, and they were fooling around with organic mixes and sustain and their recommendations, but they're using marigolds and, you know, following the companies, you know, 8 pounds per yard or 10 pounds per yard work great for marigolds, but marigolds are not herbs, and, you know, they're not vegetables. Flowers have a higher tolerance. And if I was growing baskets again, certainly I would do the sustain. It has a 45-day release rate. And so it only gets you so far, and then it starts pooping out as well. So you can't put too much in it. That's why you have to do fertigation at some point. You got to start kicking in with feed of some sort. Whether you're doing it organically or not organically, they do need food.
Any other questions out there or comments on what are people using for organic soluble fertilizers besides
We used
Nutrisource?
to do fish. We used to do liquid fish, and sometimes the stores will, you know, fertilize on Monday, and Tuesday we're delivering, and I'll get these nasty phone calls from the retailers saying, "I had to put your stuff outside. The shop stinks of fish." So no more fish. And tell you the truth, it was really nasty stuff, dealing with tubs and diluting it and pumping it out, and it was a mess. And then, you know, they're not that effective. Some of the fish products, when they were tested over in New York State, was a Crystal who ran those tests. Is that her name? At Cornell, she found like there was no fertilizer value in a lot of those liquid fishes. And anyway, it was a waste of money, and customers didn't like it. So that's why we we wound up with Nature Source, which just seems to be the best. It smells like molasses at worst, which is a nice smell. So that's what we use. And when we dilute it, okay, I'm sure someone's going to ask the question. We dilute it 50% in a bucket and then feed that out at 1 to 100 using the dosage. And you got to stir it up every once in a while. So when I walk through the greenhouse, I keep a paddle in there and just kind of stir it up, because it will tend to settle. And I do that in the field as well, for the field veggies. Use that tomato house, garlic. There's more in it than just the 3-1-1. They have what they call growth stimulants, and I have no idea what they are. The stuff seems to work pretty good. It's not cheap, but I think it's effective for the money.
Question in the chat for you, Howard. Do you ever find when you're using vermiculite that seeds don't get enough soil contact? Wondering about alliums in particular.
Haven't found that to be true. And sometimes with alliums, maybe I have used more of my soil mix instead of the vermiculite. And I fooled around with it both ways, and they do well without vermiculite, just covering it with soil. But I always found covering with soil, you don't know what depth, you know, you get confused as to how much soil you're really trying to do an even covering. But it hasn't been a problem. I do keep them moist. I do make sure I water the hell out of the alliums like several times a day in the greenhouse to keep that vermiculite moist. So that might be the problem.
And you start quite a few onion plants. Is it the same system that you showed, the same mix? You're using the sustain for those two? And what size tray are you using?
Yeah, I do use some sustain. I have grown onions, and they've done great in direct compost space, either McEnroe or Vermont compost, just straight Fortlight or premium McEnroe, and they do great. And I'll probably return to that actually next year. I think they did better than growing it in my peat mix this year. You know, every year some strains of plants seem to have great years. Like this year is a great basil year. Last year something, you know, it's just funny. Every year something just seems to do bad, you know, exceptional, and something this is the year our thyme is not great. But And you never know particularly why. Is it something I did or the sun, the moon, planets? I have no idea. But it's for me, basil's doing unbelievable. And that's a hard one to do. So I'm happy. But yeah, we do a lot of alliums, although I cut way back in my field onion production, way back. And I noticed some other growers did as well. But there's a huge demand for starch for onions, but we don't even do that anymore. It's a long growth season, but there's a big demand for that. Vegetable plants, huge demand on a lot of things that never used to be a huge demand. I'm trying to simplify our life.
Well, I think after 50 years, you deserve a little simplification.
No,
Just have a few minutes left. Does anyone have a question or comment that they haven't had a chance to get in yet?
let me show, while I'm here, I happen to be standing next to our mint production. I don't know if you could see that. We do
Yes,
all
we
of our
can.
mint cuttings and 4 different types of mint. And they root out on this heated bench. It's almost like magic. I could stick in a mint cutting in the morning. I think I could come by that night and they'll start to root out. I mean, it really is, it's pretty magical. It's another one of these crops this year that I have no idea what's going on, but people, where they used to order 1 tray of each type of mint, this year they want 4 trays of peppermint, 4 trays of this, and 6-inch pots of mints that never were a big item and were sold out. So it's crazy. Must be new gardeners, because an established gardener, once you plant mint, you never buy another pot of mint. So there must be a lot of new gardeners out there.
It's a question about experience with microgreen production in low fertility, peat-based mixes. And if you haven't done it, Howard, maybe somebody else has. Anybody out there growing microgreens?
I've done it for my own consumption and fooling around. I would say using compost for microgreens, compost-based soil is the way to go. You don't have to, there's enough nutrients in it to grow. If you're growing microgreens, I don't think you need any more than that. And it's going to hold the moisture. It's probably better for microgreens than using peat-based, in my opinion. I've done it for myself, but I don't do it commercially. That's it. No more questions.
So Caleb, you want to elaborate? What are people seeing over there in Maine as far as problems in the mixes? What symptoms?
Oh, I don't know that it's happened yet this year, but in years past, there were folks that had one bad batch from an established composter where they got really odd chlorosis symptoms, and it worked out to be that the pH was just really high, and then they had a bizarre micronutrient deficiency. That was when Bruce Hoskins at the UMaine Soil Lab helped diagnose that. I think the organic acids is another one. I think the real issue is people are not mixing up things and they get a wet patch of mucky, gross compost that just kind of that falls into, so many cells, and that part of the tray really gets bad. Whereas diluting it out and I'm hoping that I can encourage folks to move towards more dilution with other mixes. Well, it looks like Chris has something to say.
Yep. Right, great.
Not on that topic. I had a question for Howard. The soil mixer tray filler seems like a pretty significant efficiency improvement for you. Anything more you can say on that in terms of the payback on it, and maybe how, when it made sense for you to take the leap into doing something like that?
I get that question. People ask, what's your ROI on this piece of equipment? But, I don't put pen to paper and figure it out. Oh, in 2.1 years or this year, it really is like a seat of the pants. Like, also, if you're finding significant amount of time is taking up doing a particular task that can be automated, then that's the time to automate it. It's hard to quantify like as a formula. Okay, now it's the time. it's really amount of labor. What is your time better spent doing? You know, well, time is better spent actually putting the plants in the soil, you know, not just putting the soil in the tray. So, and the other thing is, it's easier to get people to work on a production line, like filling the tray, than, you know, it's drudgery. You try to, you know, you think of the people, you know, you want to make the hard jobs easy, you know, so that they could do the jobs that are more pleasant and more profitable. Filling trays is kind of like, there's nothing to be learned there by doing it by hand. At some point, you've learned all you could learn, you know, so now you get a piece of machinery. And but before I had the flat filler, we just had the early model with basically it's turning it and it's coming up the auger and you're filling it by hand. And that was a huge increase from doing it on a big table, you know. And I thought, wow, this is awesome, you know, because you could do baskets and stuff. But when I saw that they had that conveyor, the new model, and we just upgraded to that, and it's been great. When did it break even? I have no idea. It doesn't really matter. You know, if the cash, if you got the cash, you're a smash. Buy the machine, you know, it's time to do it. You know, invest in it and do it and don't look back. So, and the other thing about good equipment, as you know this, from the listserv, if you take care of equipment, you could sell it 10 years later and recoup like 3/4 of what you paid for it, you know, or something like that. I don't know what the formula is, but I've been amazed. I sold a mulch layer that I had for 35 years, and I think I sold it for what I paid for it because the appreciation of the price of equipment, you know, and if it's in good shape, it's still worth it to another grower because they're saving money. So good equipment is always, I love buying stuff.
Thanks, Howard. Appreciate that.
Does that help?
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
All right, we're gonna start selling futures on Howard's tray filler there. See what it's worth 15 years from now.
NFTs burn. Is that what it's called? Virtual.
Something like that.
But,
Time for
oh,
one. There's one more in the chat here.
Okay.
Oh, let's see. That was a comment actually. Yeah. Any last questions before we have to wrap things up? There's an ROI for sore muscles, isn't there? Probably.
All right.
I want to thank you for taking the time to do this, pulling some slides together and sharing your wealth of knowledge with the community. Very much appreciated. And
Anyone
this-
can always email me or text me.
Great. And this will be recorded for the growers who couldn't make it. And this wraps up our spring greenhouse webinar. I think people are getting very busy, so we'll put things off for a while and probably pick up later in the summer.
It's been
Have a
great.
day, everybody.
Hope
Bye-bye.
everybody has a great season. Bye-bye.